and welcome to this conversation, one that I am very excited to have. I am joined by some remarkable filmmakers today, and we're going to be broadly discussing the art of short filmmaking, but really I think that this conversation is going to be about creative process and what draws us to making, watching, and exploring short film. So my name is Amanda Salazar. I'm the head of programming and acquisition at Argo. We are a new curated short film platform. Before we get started, I have a few people I would like to thank, because without them, we would not kind of be gathered here today. And one of those, people and kind of events is why we're hosting this conversation is because of Sundance London, which is taking place from July 29th to August 1st. So with that, I would like to thank the Sundance Institute. I'd like to thank Picture House, and I'd also like to thank XRM Media. So thank you all for joining me today. As I already said, and you can tell I'm very excited to chat with you. Could you each actually just introduce yourselves and tell us where in the world you are joining us from? Ellen, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure. I'm Ellen Evans. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I'm in London.
Great. Akinola?
Akinola Davies Jr. I'm a filmmaker, and I'm also in London.
Great. Julia.
I guess I'll go, I'm the only one left. I'm Julia Pott. I'm an animator and I'm from London, but I'm currently in Los Angeles.
Great. I love it. We're in different time zones and joining from different areas of the world. It's always lovely. So as I mentioned, I think each of you have made multiple short films. I definitely want to talk about short films in general and kind of what draws you to it. But again, really more of the creative process. So for me, I'm going to start like very far back at the beginning. So what drew you to filmmaking? More broadly, what is it about the moving image, like medium, that you were gravitated towards as a creative outlet to tell your stories? I'd like to start with you, Julia, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I always said that I wanted to work for Disney when I was a little kid, but I think I thought that meant working at the theme park and being a princess and animating the movies. I drew everything sequentially all the time. And so I went and did my foundation course at Chelsea. They pointed out that I would either respond well to being a comics artist or to being an animator. And my animation teacher at Kingston said, you're an animator if you draw an illustration and it seems like the starting point and you can't help but have it move. And I really love reading short stories, and it felt like the best translation from short stories to film was animation, because it's so stream of consciousness and you can animate the way that your body feels, and it's very tangible, it's very amorphous, and I find it just very cathartic. I'm quite an introverted person, so filmmaking from the live action side didn't ever really appeal to me, and animation felt like a way of describing my world and telling stories from a place which was more alone.
Can I add a little question to that, which is about to that process? So in the beginning of your short filmmaking, was it always by yourself? Was it always just you?
Well, I would usually work with an animator to help me out, and there would be a friend, and there would be a sound designer also that I would work with, Joe Tate, and he did a lot of Foley, so he'd be like stomping around in bowls of porridge and stuff. But for the most part, you're alone for most of the process.
Got it. Wonderful. Who would like to go next?
I'll let Akinola go next. I'm thinking.
Let's say the same thing. What drew me to visual filmmaking? I don't really know. I mean, similar to Julia, I think I was really obsessed with kids' TV. I remember I grew up in Nigeria and used to come home from school and TV would start at like 5 o'clock or something. And for the first 2 hours, you'd always get like Fraggle Rock and Sesame Street and the Muppet Babies and stuff like that. So I think that's probably like done a lot of groundwork for a lot of my sensitivities in life, I would say. But I think beyond that, I guess I've always been interested in storytelling. I think I wasn't really a big reader. I used to write a lot, but I remember I studied history at like GCSE, and I remember our history teachers, they would always play us films in our history lessons. and basically everyone in my school got like an A star at history. So I think there was like this real, at least for myself, I kind of maybe noticed much later on that the sort of learning that was best suited to me was like visual learning. I wasn't necessarily someone who I didn't not like reading. It just never really held my attention for long enough. So I think somewhere in there, I've always been somewhat a lot more drawn to pictures. In terms of me becoming a director, I think it was really just the whole process of trial and error. I mean, I didn't ever think, I think quite early on in my teens, I thought I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I just didn't know anyone who was a filmmaker, and I didn't certainly think it would potentially be quite possible. I didn't study film. I wanted to be a journalist. But I basically went a very unorthodox route and just hung out a load on film sets and assisted photographers and directors and stuff like that, and realized that my personality was probably better suited to being a director, which is probably quite like the biggest position you could go for. But I tried every role, but I think my strengths are definitely like trying to bring out the best in people. So I think that probably paired itself, but I still have ambitions of wanting to work the Sesame Street one day, basically.
Me too.
I was going to say there's lots of connections here. I also say like me too, like Jim Henson has been like formative to my film watching. So I already feel like a kindred connection here. Ellen, you next, please. What kind of started, what drew you to filmmaking?
It's interesting. I mean, I didn't really think of myself as like a visual person for a really long time. I think it's similar to what Akinola was saying, like I didn't know nobody in my family did anything like creative, and I wasn't really exposed to it. When I was a kid, I used to write loads, and I used to love like telling stories, but it didn't really seem like a career. It didn't seem like something that you could just do for a job. And actually, so I kind of came in through, I was kind of wanting to do like factual television, really. Like I kind of started, when I first came into documentary, it was because, I thought, I'd love to be like a researcher on Panorama. I was quite like interested in social justice type stuff. And it was only through, I like went and did a master's in ethnographic and documentary film. And that was like the first time I'd really pursued something creative. And I had an amazing lecturer, and he was more like he was an artist filmmaker. So they kind of missold the course, but it was cool because he exposed me to amazing films, and it was kind of, and then my focus kind of shifted, and I realized I wanted to make my own films, and actually that I was quite a visual person. I'd done like photography and stuff. I don't know why I didn't take it more seriously, but it's been like a gradual kind of ever shifting process. And things become more possible to you the more you're kind of exposed to it. So before, like a few years ago, if you'd asked me whether I'd ever do fiction, I would have been like, absolutely not. That's not, like, no way. I don't even know how people do that, or like, how could you imagine a world? And now I find myself increasingly drawn to it. So it's been like it's been a slow burner.
Wonderful. So then overall, because as I mentioned, or I'll just mention again, all of you have actually done multiple short films. And so I'm curious what draws you to the short film format, and perhaps why you continue to work in it for those of you that have some current work out there right now. Ellen, do we want to start with you?
Budget? No, I think that is an important thing when you're like, when you're emerging, or when, it's like, I don't know, the first kind of proper film that I made with a little budget had to be like 3 minutes long, because, those were the kind of funding conditions. But those limitations are really, they can be very galvanizing to work against, right? And I think it makes you if you can work in short form, hopefully, you can work in long form. But there's something really hard about telling a story in a really short amount of time. But yeah, it's a kind of, I don't know, that somebody else should take over. I'm just waffling now.
You're doing great. You're doing great.
Akinola, what about you? Yeah.
I would probably I'd tail off the back of that. I would just say quite early on, I didn't really know I was making short films. It was really not until I met the guys at, it hadn't ever dawned on me I was making short films till I met Rosa Garnett at BBC, and she was like, oh, you've made a lot of short films. And I was like, what? I've never made a short film. I don't know what you're talking about. And she was like, no, a lot of the things you've done are short films, basically. But pretty much what Ellen said, it was, the early part is like what I call like the economics of filmmaking. I didn't, before I probably like committed to being a director, I'd just watched a lot of directors work on set and just seen the sort of work they were creating. Another thing similar to what Ellen said is, until you get exposed to stuff, I didn't think I would ever write like narrative. I didn't think I had it in me to write narrative, short, let alone long form narrative. I was just like, oh, I probably need to figure that stuff out. But I think with short filmmaking, it was really just, for me, it was like the economics of filmmaking. I can't stress that enough. I would rent out equipment on a Friday. I learned that you could rent out equipment on a Friday, pay for Friday, and then return it on the Monday. So I was like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I'm just going to do that loads and shoot multiple things on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Obviously, my collaborators thought I was mental, but it was like a very intense sort of grounding in trying to make stuff in a very short amount of time. And also just not necessarily having the resources to do a lot. Short films just meant you can be a lot more focused on like a smaller idea. You probably could try and figure out like, a 3-act structure in smaller space, because I wasn't working with dialogue. So a lot of it was all like music focused. A lot of it was sort of cinematography focused. A lot of it was like composition focused and stuff like that. So yeah, I think short films kind of offer a lot by way of what I would probably call as like sort of incubators for bigger ideas, like if you don't have the means to do a bigger idea, then certainly a shorter idea can be like a starting point. Not that I knew what I was necessarily doing at the time, but for sure.
And what about you, Julia? Any thoughts on kind of what drew you to the short film format?
Yeah, I think it's all it's budgetary at first, of course, and also you're just dipping your toe into the medium. A lot of my short films started in college, so that was sort of the mandate, was to make a short film under 7 minutes. And yeah, I think the short film world was very helpful to me, because they would get submitted to festivals much more so than if I had gone straight into making a feature. And so many of my collaborative connections have come from meeting people at film festivals. I've never really thought of myself as a feature filmmaker, and I don't really have a lot of desire to make a feature film. But I moved into television after making a few short films, and the way that I did that was I just wanted to keep making short films, and someone said, well, why don't you think about making a television show? It's like a series of short films with the same cast of characters. And that was a really interesting way of thinking about working in the television space, especially in kids television, as they're all 11 minutes long. Every day, every week, you get to show up with a new idea and experiment with a new thing that's exciting you, and then the next week you move on to a different story. And that felt like, yeah, like a crash course in short films, even though I suppose it's episodic.
Right. So now maybe like reflecting back, each of you, on maybe that first short film you made, or Akinola, you might say you didn't know it was a short, but you did make one. Knowing kind of what you know now, what advice would you give your past self?
I probably wouldn't give myself any advice, if I'm honest. I think for me personally, I overcame a lot of insecurities and a lot of fear just through the process in itself. Mm-hmm. I remember it was like, I think I had just learned what a cinematographer was like a year before or something like that. And then I managed to convince a whole bunch of friends to come together to make something, and I was paying for it all myself. And I think I needed to go through a lot of those processes really to kind of understand and really sort of like humble myself about the medium and be like, this is really what I wanted to do. Because when you're spending like effectively like a few months of rent money on a film with no real sort of knowledge of like where it's going to go, kind of have to be committed to it, you know. And I think that was probably the scariest thing. I think I shot the thing and had a great day, and being on set is amazing, and afterwards it was just, they're like, hey, here are the files, figure it out, basically. So I think that was probably the scariest thing. I was like, okay, I have to edit this now. It's all on me to put this stuff together. So I probably wouldn't give myself any advice, because I think that, I think I just had to formulate a certain level of commitment and relationship to what I was doing, which probably is what's kind of served me throughout all I've been doing since then, basically. I would probably say it's probably really something innocuous, like, you know, like just reassure the people whose house you're shooting stuff in that you're going to pay for a cleaner or something like that. I don't know, because it took ages and a lot of arguments afterwards with my friends who were like, wow, there's 60 people here. We weren't quite prepared for that, basically. But yeah, that's probably what I would say.
There you go. You would encourage yourself, and then you would also say, maybe when we're renting a house, get a cleaner. Got it. No, that's great.
Exactly.
Thank you. Ellen or Julia, anything for you?
Yeah, I mean, I probably ask myself more questions than I would encourage myself about where I get all my energy and raw confidence. I think I had much more ideas at that age. I think I definitely wouldn't give myself advice. I think going into your first short film, you don't know what kind of filmmaker you are yet. So there's a lot less pressure. I felt like my second short film, that would have been where I really needed to sit down and calm myself down. I mean, my first short film is not good, but I think going into it, I'd had this revelation that I could make a film about something that interested me rather than something that would interest my teachers. And so I was just like riding the wave of actually being excited for the first time. I think, the first time you go out in the world and make a short film, there's just no pressure put on it because you don't know what you're going to make, and no one has to see it if it goes wrong. I suppose no one has to see anything you do if it goes wrong, but I think I just leave myself there to do it as I did it.
Mm-hmm. Ellen, for you, any reflection on that?
Any reflection? What would I say to myself? I think it's quite funny. I get like a bit cringy when I think about the very first time that I've worked, because I kind of learned to shoot and edit myself. So the first like few films I made, I just shot and edited like completely solo. But the first time I worked with like any kind of crew, it was just a cinematographer. And I think I felt such kind of pressure. I don't know. And I really felt like I was sort of trying to be a director. I was thinking like, okay, well, what do directors do? You know, like trying to, and I kept saying action, and it was so embarrassing because it was just like me and him, and it was a documentary. There's really no need to say action. I'm going red even thinking about it now. But yeah, I mean, I think what I'd say to myself is that, you know, just first of all, there's no need to say action if you don't want to, if it doesn't feel comfortable. You know, it's like, oh God. And you know, you don't have to say that word. Just because you think that's what directors say doesn't mean that you have to do it. And actually there's no sort of, I feel like directors do things in their own way, really. It's not like, you know, you're not like a doctor. There's not a kind of like code of like this, well, there should be a code of conduct, but there's not like a kind of set way to do things. And you know, just relax, just be yourself and approach things in a way which feels natural, you know. And that would probably make you a better director in the end, you know. Sorry, I've got so embarrassed just even thinking about that incident.
I feel honored that you would actually share that with us. So thank you. Thank you, Ellen. So I'll kind of switch gears a little bit here. When I was telling you earlier, I've been thinking a lot about place, like the physicality of it. I think just given the nature of us having to talk to one another digitally. And that had me thinking about place in terms of your films. And I'll get into it, but like I have two questions here. And one is more kind of geographically specific, and then another is perhaps more metaphorical. So follow me with this one. So my first question is kind of given the connecting thread here of like Sundance London, you all being filmmakers that either have, reside or have made work in the UK or are doing both. And I'm asking this in kind of a vague way. So I'm just curious what comes to mind first, which is can you talk about what being a British filmmaker means to you? And if you identify with that question. Anyone want to go first?
Sorry, someone's calling me. I was like, what's going on? I forgot to put this on, whatchamacallit. I'll take it first, because obviously my phone's trying for me to take it first as well. I don't know what it necessarily means to be a British filmmaker. I'd probably say like there's something in line of, at least in my experience, there's probably something in line of having to rely on being a lot more creative or being a lot more ingenuine in how you approach things, because maybe in a sense, at least from my experience, it never seems like there's enough like resources to sort of do stuff. So it makes you feel that you probably have to think just outside of the box in regards to how things can get made. I would probably agree with maybe what Julia said about things feeling like there's no pressure. I guess Brits have a very good self-deprecating relationship with themselves. So there's this case of not necessarily, in some instances, not necessarily having to take yourself too seriously. And I think maybe the most important thing is that, at least from my point of view, I think maybe it's more London centric or whatever, but based on the fact that British, that we also reside in a very like diverse melting pot. So we have like a vast access to a whole range of different, I guess maybe like cultural tapestries. We just have like a very rich mix of cultures that kind of reside either in this city or in this little plague island of ours, whereby we all come into contact with each other quite a lot and contact with each other's culture a lot. So I think that maybe in a sense builds a lot of empathy in regards to the way you kind of approach things, and maybe the way you approach people as well, maybe. But it also depends. I mean, like I almost feel like I don't really necessarily believe like anyone's particularly from anywhere. So we all have like a long line of history and culture that come from so many different places that kind of inform a lot of things. But I guess, where we are in our generation then becomes where we're like from or whatever. But yeah, sorry, getting very philosophical there. But yeah.
The question is meant to be such, so Akinola, it's great. It's not, who would like to go next? Ellen, perhaps you?
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I've got such a, I think Akinola gave a really excellent answer. I don't have that much more to kind of say above that. I mean, obviously, all of my films are very concerned with like a question of Britishness. Motherland is entirely about that question. And, some of my other films have, portrayed characters who are very like quintessentially British in their own kind of eccentric ways, and thinking about life in miniature then. So, I mean, obviously this, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I don't think I as a filmmaker, I think all of my films will always be inquiring about questions of Britishness and the UK. I couldn't really imagine making a film outside of Britain in a way, other than if it was in Malaysia, where half my family's from, so it's like rooted in my identity in some way. But yeah, I mean, I really don't have anything intelligent to say on that. Just it's a constant source of inspiration, inquiry.
Mm-hmm. That was great. Don't worry, that was very intelligent and actually rather articulate for what you were trying to get across. Julia, what about yourself?
I think the thing that comes to mind most is having moved away from England. I think I appreciated how much homesickness was sort of rooted in me once I started living in the States. The show that I make now is about a group of people that live in Massachusetts, and I sort of almost like actively dismissed my roots to make the show. And then there's one character in it that's British, and I enjoy writing for that character more than any of the other characters. And I can put turns of phrase that are British in there, like spanner in the works. They don't say that here. I learned that recently. They're like, what are you talking about? And there's just, I think the British countryside, things like that, I really love when we do episodes that are based there, that tell her story. And I think it's, there's a sense of home that I think I miss from living in the States that I get to explore in my filmmaking now. And I think moving into like next projects, I'm like, oh, I'd like them to be set more in Britain and explore that than more American-based filmmaking. Mm. Because there is just a charm there that doesn't exist as much.
Yeah. Well, that kind of leads very nicely into my second part of the question. And Julia, I might start with you, which, again, thinking about place more as mood, as kind of atmosphere, and Ellen, to your point, actually making an entire film around the identity of place. And so, Julia, for you, in thinking about your work and a collection of work, I often just think of how you choose setting. Where do you put place into your work? What kind of inspires you? So I was wondering if you could start with that, as just kind of thinking for me. In some instances, I was like, wow, there's always water. There's always bodies of water in your work, and or not always, but I'm just curious if you could talk about kind of place as a sense of, and I'm going to just keep it as broad as that, wherever you want to go with it.
I think a lot of the times with place, I'm trying to find things that you can't set in a particular period of time. So the beach feels very timeless, and you can't really set it anywhere, and it also has a rhythmic lilting eeriness that I really like and associate with childhood instantly. I really like the sounds of whales, so I like setting things at the beach because I think that's a very spooky, beautiful sound. For the show, there's different areas. It's sort of a world building exercise. Right. And with that, I wanted to explore different things that inspired me. So there's ghosts, and so those aesthetics are built around Casper, because I love that. I love Casper, the friendly ghost. And then there's a sort of a Yeti meadow that is sort of synonymous with the snowman, and it was sort of, there are things from my childhood that I really like to play around with, and I think it's a lot with sound design, like sound of boots on snow. It's very satisfying and crunchy and also timeless. And they talk a lot about clouds. Clouds are a unifying force throughout time because they've always been here and people have always found meaning in them. And I like things that just go throughout time, that aren't specific to a certain place. So you sort of feel more embodied in the world than thinking about are we in 2020? Is it 1950? Where are we?
Definitely. Akinola, what are your thoughts kind of on place and mood and how you approach setting, I think, in kind of all of your work, which is, different genres that you work within?
How do I approach it? I would probably, I mean, I think it's maybe just more of a reflection on me. I'm just very obsessed with the human condition. I'm one of those really stubborn people that I know there's a saying that I'm going to butcher this, I always butcher sayings, but there's a saying that the man who doesn't want to learn from other people's experiences is a fool, or something like that. But I'm yeah, that's me. I'm the fool, basically, because I really just want to experience things for myself, and I always really try and lock into what I think other people are feeling in given a specific context or given a specific situation, because I think that the sort of storytelling I like and the sort of films I love growing up, and even I was speaking to someone the other day, I was just like, I struggle to watch sports documentaries because I just cry like for no reason, out of nothing, you know, like just seeing someone crossing the finish line is like, it's just a culmination of everything you've been working for. Like I get very overwhelmed based on sort of, I guess, the human experience. So I would probably say that's always a starting point. And then I probably marry that with like an urgency to sort of readdress a certain sort of balance in regards to sort of like pictures that are out in the world, especially of like the Black experience, because I think if I look back to maybe also why I wanted to become a filmmaker, it's probably something to do with wanting to see more reflections of what it was like for me to grow up, or wanting to see more people that look like me, or more stories that I felt like I could identify with. I'd probably say those things are probably like my North Stars in terms of sort of like mood or anything basically moving into, and maybe the third bit would just be like an idea of sort of like magic. I feel like there's magic everywhere, like even in the most mundane situations, you know, I feel like just going to the shop can be a really magical experience, or just, you know, like having a shower could be a really magical experience. It's kind of boundless, and I guess I'm always quite optimistic about life. So I think that's probably what magic serves in how I want to tell stories.
Yeah. Ellen, I kind of want to pivot my question to almost tie that together, because you did touch on this. So I do want to give you also the space to also talk about place, like within your work and what you're discovering.
Mm-hmm.
But with what Akinola just said kind of about magic, I mean, you're actually connecting with these people and having what I consider like very, you know, intimate and magical moments with them. Would you mind like talking about that and like being the kind of vessel in some ways of holding that and then creating a story around it?
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting question, and I think I love making documentaries because there are these moments of magic, right? And it's for me, they're like moments of truth. They're when somebody says something which not only speaks to their experience, but is also kind of it refracts into everybody's experience, right? They're saying something which is particular, but at the same time universal. And I think when that happens, it is a magical moment, you know, and you feel like somebody's kind of really speaking a truth there, and you've managed to access something which is like really real and very moving. So yeah, and you know, spontaneity is like the lifeblood of documentary, and I think, you know, it perhaps it also unfolds, right? Those moments which you can't plan for and which you can't predict, but when they happen and you capture them, they're like the most beautiful things you've ever seen, right? I think when we make films, we are sort of trying to present reality in some way, or someone's version of reality. And yeah, when you kind of capture something without and it, you know, and it's spontaneous, it can be really beautiful. That to me is the magic of documentary and of filmmaking in a larger sense. And with regards to the question about place and world making, it's quite interesting because obviously I'm working in non-fiction, right? I don't have like sets. I'm always, you know, filming in people's homes or in like the real landscape around them. But the way I kind of conceive of it is like, well, you know, we have to present it in a way which feels fresh again, right? To kind of present it in a way which is like, you know, frame it so it doesn't feel mundane and everyday, frame it so that it feels kind of you know, magical. It feels that, you know, there's something kind of poetic about what you're seeing, so that when people see those images, it feels like they're seeing them new again, even though it's documentary, right? Yeah, so no matter like what part of, you know, where I am in making the film, whether it's like like a suburban housing estate in Hull, or if it's like, actually in Jamaica, somewhere I've never been before, or wherever it is, trying to find those images and find those frames that allow people to kind of see things anew again. Yeah, sorry, long answer.
No, that was great. Does anyone, it actually makes me come back with a comment and not really a question, which is around kind of this word. I don't want it to sound flippant, but in connecting all of your work, I've thought about like the word play, and not from like a childlike standpoint, but much more from the experimentation. And Ellen, to your point of what you just said about taking these images, in the nonfiction space and then presenting them as, getting at the heart of a truthful story, right? And then this is, and what that looks like. And I'm just curious, as more of a thought, when like thinking about how you approach your work, and if I like ask the question about like what about the work, what do you enjoy most about kind of like experimentation or experimenting? I don't really have a formed question, clearly. I'm just going off of what you're saying. So I hope someone will chime in, or maybe not. I want to actually, in many references, talk about this with Akinola, with your work, and maybe your current film that's playing, because there's a use, there is an image, and I don't want to give anything away, that kind of becomes playful. It means many things, but I just really appreciate the kind of that magic you were talking about, and using the moving image to kind of make a point. And so I was wondering if maybe you could kind of talk a little bit about that, or how you approach experimentation.
It's interesting listening to Ellen. I watch a lot of video essays, just like on the internet. It's just what I do, basically. And I was watching one, because someone mentioned something about my work feeling like some sort of similarity with like Terrence Malick, and I couldn't tell you at the time when I was told. I couldn't tell you a Terrence Malick film. Afterwards, I was like, oh, that guy. But in this sort of video essay, they were talking about how he and Lubeski have created a style whereby they just like improv a lot, and they also have like a code of how they would shoot like very specific things. And there was something akin to them saying like about almost exactly what Ellen said. It's like this idea of freedom and trying to like capture truth. Like sometimes actors would be doing something and then birds would fly and then the camera would just like pan away to a flock of birds or something like that. And I guess even though like I haven't watched a lot of his films or whatever, I thought that's quite fun. Maybe to some people it's like breaking a lot of like thematic or cinematic sort of rules or whatever, but I think play is like pretty essential. I mean, like I said before, I assisted a lot of photographers and filmmakers, and it would always happen that like everything would be great, and then we'd get on set and then everyone would be so serious all of a sudden. Like I just, for the life of me, couldn't understand why that happened. I always just assumed, at least for me, whenever I was on set, like this is the most fun. What we're doing here is like a real privilege. It's like a real pleasure. So at least from my point of view, I try and ensure that set should feel like just like a dream environment for all my collaborators, or even not just set, any part of the process should feel like fun. I say to my because I thought I wanted to edit at one point, I say to my editors, like, to be honest, like, forget the storyboards, forget everything, just first pass, try and make me cry. Like that's the kind of, that's what we're going for, basically. And then if we need to work backwards from that, we can do that. So I would always say that, I don't know, I guess it's still sort of like finding my voice and finding a language, but I think play, and I haven't seen Ellen's films and I haven't seen Julia's animations, but I think maybe it draws back to the whole Sesame Street and Disney thing in the beginning, that like we all have a softness or an affinity to play. And I think play just enables people to not take themselves so seriously, to maybe just approach work with a certain level of joy, because I legitimately think that if people work in a joyful environment, it reflects in the work. I think, that most you know, most of my favorite things that I've made, I know the process that we were all around when we were making it, and a lot of it was just really fun. Also, because I wanted to be an editor, I'm like, it doesn't matter, like you're just gonna find the film in the edit anyway. So like, let's really enjoy what we're doing in this moment. Let's not take it too seriously. Let's like try stuff, because it's better we try stuff here and now, even if it doesn't make the cut, than to like be sat in an edit suite and being like, oh, I wish we would have been a little bit more flexible in sort of what we were doing then, you know? But yeah, I don't know if that answers the question at all, but.
Absolutely. I didn't really have a question, so I think I mean, Alan and Julia, I'm so curious, again, two very different styles in your approaches to filmmaking. What are kind of your thoughts, maybe piggybacking off of, you know, what Akinola was saying and your approach?
I think working with a bunch of storyboard artists and things like that in the television world, it's been, and being more of a director of a group of people has been an interesting experiment in trying to be more playful, because I think you're kind of the person that comes in, and if you're in a bad mood or if you're overthinking something, that seeps into the rest of the room. And I feel like the longer you work, I felt like the longer I worked on the show, the more fossilized I became. I became like more like just ritualized in how I would do things. I had to regroup and be like, it's supposed to be fun, and like, let's have a bunch of donuts on the roof and think about how to make the story better. And I think a lot of the job is making it playful for everyone else so that they can bring their best work to the table, because that is the stories that we love the most, are the ones where we were laughing all through the writer's room and like just couldn't, and then they become more emotional because they're funny in parts. And it's, I think that playfulness comes out, especially in a group setting, when you're actively looking for. I think it is something that you have to practice. I don't think it often, because you get so serious because there's so much pressure that you're putting on yourself, and it has to be good, and in order for it to be good, it has to be serious. And I think just like shaking yourself out of that mindset is helpful for sure.
Yeah, I mein it's you know, documentaries just all play, really. No, but it's true, because there's no, you know, I don't work with like a shot list, you know. If I have questions for someone, they're just kind of at best like on a bit of scrap paper, you know. It's a really like free, it feels like a very natural way to make films, which is very reactive. Actually, you're always like reacting to the environment you're in, the situation you're in, how like the moods of the people around you. You know, you're not working with actors, so you can't demand anything of anyone, so you're just responding to the environment and you know, problem solving and coming up with new ideas. And yeah, so it's just, to me, it's like, it's just play.
It's like, so similar to what Julie says, you're like managing people, innit? So you kind of have, not everyone's going to respond in the same capacity. So it's like, the more, I don't know, the more you kind of humanize like how they would react and how they would do something specifically, is just like might depend on the sort of answer you're trying to get. I remember coming back to my first film, I always say to myself, if, at least for me internally, if there isn't a certain aspect of risk involved, then I probably wouldn't do something. So I think for me that maybe risk and play kind of mean similar things as well.
Absolutely. Well, I know we could talk for much longer, but I think we're going to wrap this up shortly, but I'll leave with maybe one final question, more about not necessarily like what you're doing today. I'm more curious about like, what are you doing to stay creatively motivated, or maybe just grounded, or maybe not creative at all? It's like very open-ended. What have you been doing? My question is like, what are you doing to stay creatively motivated during this time when we're kind of sheltered and away from people? But I'll let you kind of answer whichever way that you want. Julia, can I start with you?
I've been very lucky during the pandemic, because animation is a little bit pandemic proof. So we continued writing the show. So it's been full time. So that feels really nice to have that place to go and be creative. I started doing The Artist's Way. I don't know if you know what this is, but it's quite kind of a corny our 12-week course. And then I got to week 4 and they were like, you can't read anything this week. And I stopped doing it. It's like, absolutely not, I'm out. But for the first 3 weeks, it was very helpful. I definitely feel like I'm getting into a point where I'm like starting to feel a little stagnated and not knowing how to show up. But I'm just trying to read a lot and watch a lot and not put too much pressure on myself.
Great. And anything that you're reading or watching that comes to mind?
Oh, I'm reading this book by Susan Orlean called The Library Book, and it's about the history of libraries in Los Angeles, and it's so good. It's one of my favorite books I've read in a while.
Wonderful. I'll definitely check it out. Ellen, what about yourself?
I'm leaving the house. No, it's serious though. So I obviously spent the whole pandemic working from home, pretty much. And I've recently got this amazing studio space. It's just like a little desk, but that to me has been a really good move creatively, because it makes me treat it more like work, you know, and you know, I come in at the same time every day, I work, and then I leave, and I leave my laptop here. And I think that's been really beneficial, actually, you know, to have a sort of distinction between home and you know, is it work? It is work. Creative work is work. So yeah, that's been really vital.
Great.
I would say mine's probably simpler in a way. It's just taking better care of myself. I think that there's a lot of my friends who, even similar to what Julie said before, is like the second film, you feel like pressure. It's like I try and do a lot of things to not have any sort of like pressure on myself. So for the most part, I live like a very simplified sort of like lifestyle. I enjoy the most mundane things. It's like cooking, watching TV, sleeping, talking on the phone, drinking loads of water. But because I think like all those things, I feel like a healthy mind and a healthy body like are probably super key towards feeling creative, because I just feel like this, it's probably a really cliche thing to say, but I feel like there's a lot of like creativity sort of everywhere. So, and I think there is a certain level of sort of innate curiosity that I have around people and around things. And I think by default, you know, that helps, but also I try and limit myself from a lot of things. Around friends, around people, I become very like socially, like a social chameleon. I become like a sponge. So I find that I try and stay away from people for like periods of time, because I don't want to start not being able to hear my voice, because I'm so obsessed with people that I start like mimicking them and mimicking their thoughts. I just want to be able to be committed to sort of like my thoughts and committed to like what I genuinely think of stuff, you know. Like my older brother, who I write with a lot, always calls me out on stuff. It's like, do you think that, or have you just like regurgitated that from somewhere else? So I'm just trying to do a lot more, I guess like listening to myself and what I think I enjoy doing, and reading a little bit, trying to read more. Bell Hooks, All About Love, is probably what I'm trying to get through at the moment, and I feel very seen reading it. But yeah, it's a really good book, basically.
Yeah.
And what about yourself? What are you reading at the moment?
Me?
Yeah.
To be honest, I'm also reading Bell Hooks, All About Love, like it's like sitting right next to me. But then I'm also reading Jenny Odell's How to Do Nothing. I don't know if you've read that book, and she's a Bay Area author. I'm based in the Bay Area, and I know that was like it was very widely read, and I'm maybe in the same mindset, trying to. I also find it really ironic that you're reading a book that says how to do nothing, and you're reading. It was like, all right, I get this, but it's obviously much more about kind of giving yourself that space, which I really also personally connect with. So yeah, it's an interesting time as we're going into kind of year 2 of us all being isolated from one another. So with that, I do want to thank you all for this wonderful conversation, your like generosity of energy and also just curiosity and connection and just, you know, opening up about your process. For Akinola and Ellen, like your films are playing in Sundance London coming up. So your current work, very excited for anyone watching this to make sure to check it out. And thank you all again. Like I said, I hope you all watch each other's work and then maybe also then find the connections that I did, which was a joy to watch again. And thank you again so much for just joining me in this conversation.
Thanks for having us. It was lovely.
All right. Bye-bye.